The shadow in the fog. I had always loved hiking alone. There was something about the solitude, the raw beauty of untouched nature, that made me feel alive. This time, I had chosen a mountain trail that few people ever ventured to. It was rumored to be dangerous, not because of the terrain, but because of the disappearances. They said hikers had gone missing without a trace. No remains, no abandoned gear, nothing. Just gone. Some blamed the weather. Others whispered about something unnatural lurking in the fog that often rolled over the peaks. I wasn't superstitious, and the thrill of an unexplored trail was too tempting to ignore. I started early in the morning, my backpack filled with supplies for a 2-day trek. The first day was uneventful. Just me, the towering trees, and the crunch of dirt beneath my boots. By sunset, I reached a flat clearing near a cliffside where I decided to set up camp. The view was breathtaking. Far below, the valley stretched endlessly, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. As night fell, an eerie silence settled over the forest. No wind, no rustling leaves, not even the chirping of insects. Just absolute stillness. I had just zipped up my sleeping bag when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling my tent. My body tensed. I held my breath, listening. It wasn't the light scurrying of an animal. These were human footsteps, but I was alone. I reached for my flashlight, my heart pounding as I unzipped the tent just a crack. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating the mist that had begun to creep in. That was when I saw it. A shadow, a tall, unmoving figure standing just beyond the reach of my light, shrouded in fog. Its eyes, glowing red pinpricks, stared straight at me. I gasped and jerked the flashlight toward it, but the beam only hit empty air. The figure was gone. But the mist was getting thicker, pressing against my tent as if something inside it was breathing. I closed the tent, trying to calm my racing heart. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was just tired. But then, a whisper, right outside the thin fabric of my tent. I didn't sleep that night, and when dawn finally broke, I unzipped my tent, half expecting to see nothing unusual. But there, in the dirt surrounding my tent, were footprints. Not just one set, dozens, and all of them led to my tent, but none led away. The cry from the forbidden valley. I had taken the wrong path. I was supposed to follow the main trail back to my campsite, but somewhere along the way, I made a wrong turn. My GPS was useless. No signal, no way to retrace my steps. The forest was getting denser, the trees closing in like silent sentinels watching my every move. Then, I heard it. A woman crying. It was faint at first, just a soft, pitiful sob carried by the wind. But as I moved forward, it grew louder, raw with despair. I knew I shouldn't investigate. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But there was something about that cry, something that pulled at me, made me step deeper into the mist-filled valley ahead. Through the trees, I saw her. She was sitting on the ground, her back turned to me, her long, tangled hair spilled over her shoulders, and her thin, fragile body shook with every sob. She wore a dress, old and tattered, like she had been lost in the forest for years. "Are you okay?" I called out, my voice uncertain. The crying stopped. She went completely still. The air around us felt heavier, pressing against my skin like an invisible weight. Slowly, she turned, and that's when I saw her face. Or rather, the lack of one. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over where her features should have been. My stomach twisted. My legs locked in place, refusing to move. Then, the silent face opened. A gaping hole tore through the center of her face, stretching impossibly wide. And from within that void, the crying returned. But now it wasn't just one voice. It was dozens, hundreds, a chorus of lost souls wailing in agony. echoing from the abyss inside her. I ran. Branches clawed at my arms. Roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't stop. The cries followed me, weaving through the trees, growing louder, closer. Then, ahead, I saw it. My tent, right where I had left it before I got lost. I dived inside, zipped it shut, and curled into myself, shaking uncontrollably. The wailing circled my tent, rising and falling, as if searching for a way in. And then, silence. Morning came. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the forest looked completely normal. But when I stepped outside, I saw them. Footprints, dozens of them, circling my tent, and in the distance, standing at the edge of the trees, the faceless woman watched me. I packed my things and left. I didn't look back, but even now, I still hear the crying sometimes. When I'm alone, when the night is quiet, I don't think she ever really let me go. The thing that followed me home. The hike was supposed to be a simple overnight trip. Just me, my gear, and the quiet solitude of the mountains. But something went wrong. It started on the first night. I had set up camp near a river, the sound of rushing water lulling me into a light sleep. Sometime around midnight, I woke up, feeling an unease I couldn't explain. Then I heard it. Footsteps, not coming toward my tent, but circling it. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath, listening. There shouldn't have been anyone out here. I had hiked miles off the main trail, and I was completely alone. I reached for my flashlight, hesitating before unzipping the tent. I didn't know what I expected to see. An animal? Another lost hiker? But when I shined my light outside, there was nothing. Just trees, rocks, and the empty forest. And then I noticed them. Footprints. Deep impressions in the dirt, circling my tent. Barefoot. Human. But something was wrong. The spacing was unnatural. The steps too far apart. As if whatever had made them had legs far longer than any person should. A chill crept up my spine. I scanned the trees, my flashlight trembling in my grip. Then, movement. A shape, tall and thin, barely visible in the darkness, standing just beyond the reach of my light. And then, it moved. Not like a person, not like anything natural. It flickered. 1 second it was standing by a tree. The next, it was closer. Then closer. And then gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my tent, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, waiting for the first hint of daylight. Morning came, and the forest looked normal again. No footprints, no signs of anything unusual. Maybe I had imagined it. I packed my gear and hiked back to my car as fast as I could. But when I got home, I realized something was wrong. The unease didn't leave me. The air in my apartment felt heavy, as if something unseen was watching. Then, that night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again. Footsteps, circling my bed, and then, a whisper. You brought me home. The mountain that swallowed them. There's a mountain not marked on most maps. A place where nature is untouched, not because it's remote, but because no one dares to go there. The locals call it Bukit Pemikinjiwa, the hill that eats souls. The legend says that those who climb it never return, not because they get lost, but because something takes them. I didn't believe in ghost stories, and the thought of hiking an uncharted mountain was thrilling. No tourists, no beaten trails, just raw, unspoiled wilderness. I set out at dawn, hiking deep into the dense forest that surrounded the base of the mountain. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. Birds stopped chirping, the wind died down, and the usual sounds of the forest faded into an unnatural silence. By noon, I stumbled upon something strange, a ruined campsite. A tent torn apart, its fabric flapping in the windless air. Scattered belongings lay untouched, as if the owner had simply vanished. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had been here before me. But where were they now? I should have turned back, but I didn't. As I climbed higher, I found a cave entrance, half hidden by overgrown vines. The air around it was wrong, too cold for a sunny day. And on the rocks surrounding the entrance, something was carved into the stone. Faces, hundreds of human faces, all with expressions of terror. Their mouths were open in silent screams, their eyes wide and empty. I stepped closer, running my fingers over the carvings. The stone was smooth, polished, as if the faces had been worn down by countless years. Then I saw it, a fresh carving, a face that hadn't been there before, a face that looked disturbingly familiar. Mine. I stumbled back, heart hammering. No, this was impossible. It had to be some kind of trick, an illusion. Then I heard it, a whisper, echoing from deep inside the cave. Another one comes to join us. I turned and ran. The trail was gone. The trees twisted in unfamiliar shapes. The sky darkened unnaturally fast. I sprinted blindly, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until I reached a clearing where my tent should have been. But it wasn't there. Instead, there was only the torn-up campsite I had found earlier. My own belongings, my backpack, my gear, scattered just as I had seen them hours ago. And as I stood there, trembling, I realized something horrifying. I had never found someone else's abandoned campsite. I had found my own. I had been here before, and I had never left. The door that shouldn't exist, somewhere deep in the forest, far beyond any marked trail, I found something that shouldn't have been there. An old wooden cabin. It sat in the middle of a small clearing, surrounded by dead trees, as if the forest itself refused to grow near it. The wood was rotting, the roof sagging, yet the door stood tall and untouched, almost new, as if it had been replaced recently. I should have ignored it. I should have turned back, but I didn't. The air around the cabin was unnaturally still, heavy with something unseen. I stepped onto the porch, my boots creaking against the weak planks. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the cabin was almost empty. Dust covered the floor, and the only furniture was an old wooden chair placed right in the center of the room, facing another door. A door that led to nowhere. There was no wall behind it, no frame keeping it in place. It simply stood there, freestanding in the middle of the cabin. Its surface was old and cracked, but the handle was polished, like it had been used recently. I swallowed hard. Something about it felt wrong, but my hands moved on their own. I reached for the handle. The moment I touched it, a cold shiver ran down my spine, like icy fingers trailing over my skin. The entire cabin seemed to breathe. I pulled the door open, and beyond it, a forest that wasn't mine. The trees were twisted and skeletal, their branches curling toward a sky that was too dark for daytime. The air smelled wrong, thick with something rotten, something old. And then, movement. A figure stepped into view. At first, I thought it was a person, but as it got closer, I saw that its proportions were off. Too tall, too thin. Its limbs bent in ways they shouldn't, and its face, God, its face. It was my face, but distorted, wrong. Its mouth stretched too wide. Its eyes were empty pits, and as it grinned, I realized it wasn't smiling at me. It was mimicking me. I slammed the door shut. The cabin shuddered. The air grew thick, pressing against my lungs. Then, a whisper, "Let me out." I ran. I don't know how I found my way back to my tent. I don't remember how long I ran, how many times I fell, but when I finally stopped, my hands were bleeding from clawing through the underbrush. I never went back to that part of the forest, but sometimes, at night, I wake up and find my bedroom door open, just a crack, and I know it's still waiting for me to open it again.